Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and I have been reviewing indie books on this channel for about 3 years now. And a year ago, I uploaded a video all about the cringy things indie authors do online. Nothing super bad, just those things that really aren't helping you sell your books. It's not a great look. And someone mentioned that I should do a similar video for reviewers, and I thought, that sounds like a really fun idea, and then my life imploded. So here we are a year later, and I'm finally getting around to it. Now, this video is titled Worst because, well, yes, some of the things we're going to be talking about are just, oof, not a good look. Others are steeped in some of the isms and not funness. So I didn't want to just label all of it as cringe because, as far as I'm concerned, cringe really isn't that bad. I don't care what the youths on TikTok say. So be prepared for that. And of course, we have to have the disclaimer. Yes, there are reviewers who will act in bad faith and they should be called out, but not every negative review is made in bad faith, and you should still never harass reviewers just for giving a low score. Now, with that disclaimer said, let's jump into some of the worst things reviewers do online. First up, let's start with the obvious one, the one that all reviewers should understand not to do by this point, but for some reason we keep having to bring this up, and that is tagging the author in a highly negative review. Just don't, why? Why are we doing this? Like, I don't even tag an author if it's less than 4 stars. Like, even a 3-star, I'm not tagging the author. Granted, most of the authors that I'm working with follow me, so it's not like I'm really keeping it from them, but you should never be doing this. You, to that author, are a random reviewer. They have editors, they have beta readers. If they need direct feedback, they have the network to have it. You are not benefiting them with your review by directly putting it in their face. In reality, it kind of just makes authors feel bad. Obviously, like I mentioned before, lower reviews are still valid, but reviews aren't for the authors. Reviews are for the readers. So, like, technically, you don't have to tag an author in any review ever, but I have heard that authors actually like being tagged in the higher reviews. It gives them nice, warm, fuzzy feelings. But in general, if you're more negative than positive, or even, err on the side of caution, just neutral, don't tag them. Up next is when reviewers will brag about only giving the most extreme of star ratings. They're all 5 stars. They're all 1 stars. This does not make any reviewer look good. It makes it look like you are purposefully going for like a vibe or an aesthetic in your reviewing, and less that you're actually reviewing to taste. Because naturally, you're going to have some varied levels of stars in your reading. For example, if you give every single book a 5-star, it kind of just looks like you're just trying to be positive all the time, and after a certain point, that 5-star doesn't really mean anything. It's just the thing you give every book. Even a 3 or a 4-star can still be positive and still make that 5-star more important coming from that reviewer, because not every book gets it. And as far as, all 1 stars or all 1 or 2 stars, well, to a certain extent, you either just love hate reading, which I understand that to be a thing. I personally am a notorious DNFer. If it's even tending towards a 1 star at the beginning, I'm immediately gone. Or you kind of suck at picking out books for yourself. Maybe you're stuck in a book club that isn't making great picks for you, or maybe you're caught up in hype, even though repeatedly learning that the hype isn't working out for you. Maybe try a more niche subject or a niche genre. But in general, yes, it is natural for a reviewer's ratings to tend a certain way depending on genre. I have actually looked at my statistics on Book Sirens, and it's really interesting to see your statistics laid out when you have not been purposefully trying to go a certain direction. But in general, the star rating is not necessarily supposed to be a reflection of the reviewer, so you're not necessarily any better or worse than any other reviewer for giving extreme star ratings, either one way or the other. Up next is when reviewers will post the entire synopsis at the beginning of their reviews that they're posting on the Amazon or Goodreads page. This is pointless, and I think I know why. My guess is that they originally wrote the review for like their blog, or there wasn't a synopsis already on the page, and so you had to include it in the review so that people who are reading it understand. But when you're copying and pasting that review into the Goodreads or Amazon page, you don't need to include the synopsis. The synopsis is on the same page in that website as the reviews. And there have been times where I have been looking through reviews because I was on the fence about whether or not to get a book, and I would just see the same synopsis over and over again. And I'm gonna be honest, when I see that, I just skip those reviews entirely. I'm not gonna suss out when the actual review begins of 10 different reviews in a row because they all begin with a synopsis. It is a very simple fix. Just when you copy and paste, skip the synopsis, start copying and pasting when the actual review begins. And you'll cut off a couple paragraphs, so you'll make it more likely that people on Amazon or Goodreads will actually read those reviews, because yes, the audience that goes to the Amazon or Goodreads page is not necessarily going to want the same length of review as someone going to a blog that reviews books. So there's no point. And it's just, I get that it's a little thing, but it's an aggravating thing. And I do skip reviews that have those. Just start with the actual opinion on it, with the reason for the rating. I don't need the same information on the same web page 20 times. Next up on the worst thing reviewers do online is when they assume or even brag about the fact that they believe they are completely objective. No human being on the planet is completely objective. It's literally impossible. Everything in the world is filtered through the lens of your brain and the culture you grew up in and the way you have been raised to see the world and the way you have been influenced. There is not a single person that can say that they hold the objective truth in anything. And I have gotten into arguments, granted a while ago, I've long since stopped getting into those kind of arguments online, about this kind of thing. The most important thing to do as a reviewer is to reveal your biases for the sake of transparency. I will say things like, I'm gonna be honest, I have a good standing relationship with this author. I am predisposed to like this book more than not. Or, I'm gonna be honest, this is not my usual genre, so I might be biased against it. That kind of thing is vitally important because that helps the viewer, the reader, whoever is consuming that review understand who you are and how your recommendations relate to them. Because there are some booktubers on here that I've talked to, that I've interacted with a lot, who have unhauled some of my favorite books and have specifically said that some of my favorite things in books, like kitschy sci-fi, are their least favorite. And in a weird way, they become my anti-reviewer. Meaning, anytime they say, I didn't like this book, it wasn't to my taste, like obviously there's no none of the isms, I can be like, I'm probably going to like that book. It literally becomes a case of, if it's not to their taste, it might just be to mine. But that is vitally important to do. You are not a voice of truth, pure and defined. You are a person with an opinion, and it is in your best interest to explain why exactly you hold that opinion. Up next is one that I actually didn't know was an unpopular thing for reviewers to do until I started working with indie authors, and that is not replying to review requests. I used to think that indie authors would prefer it if I just didn't say anything, if the answer was no. And then the more I spoke to indie authors, they're like, no, even a no would be better than endlessly waiting. And low-key, I'll tell on myself right now, I actually have a review sitting in my inbox waiting because I literally cannot make up my mind. So it's not that I'm not answering, it's that I literally don't have an answer yet. But if you are accepting review requests, if you are open, obviously, it is known that you are accepting review requests, you have to respond. And I get that can be really scary because you're like, oh, I just tell someone no to their face. But, and all the times that I've ever had to say no, it's never been that big of an issue. Maybe once or twice they still try to give like a Hail Mary, but maybe you might. But for the most part, the majority of authors that you interact with, at least on the indie level, will accept the no. So just give them a response. Next up is an annoying thing that reviewers do that comes with a giant asterisk. And that is when they keep complaining on their socials about not getting review copies from the major publishing houses. Now, the asterisk here is, this is not talking about when reviewers from specific marginalized groups are critiquing publishing houses for giving their books marketed in that rep of that demographic, not giving them to the actual members of that demographic in the review sphere. Obviously, if a publishing house is going to be like, here's our book on Indigenous people, here's our book about disability, what have you, yes, obviously, they should be making sure that our copies of that book make their way into the hands of reviewers in that demographic. That's just standard common ethics, and that's not what we're discussing here. We're discussing those moments when you have a booktuber or a reviewer that just wants to be made to feel special by the big publishing houses and they want free books. Here's the thing, you can get free arcs of stuff remarkably easily. The thing is, you're not gonna get the latest, greatest hyped YA novel. You're not just gonna be able to win an SJM book in a random raffle. But there are sites like Booksprout, like Bookish Firsts, like NetGalley, like, what's the other one I'm forgetting? Editing Margaret? Edelweiss. Edelweiss? Edelweiss. Thank you. Like all of those, you can get arcs. But complaining, especially as a white person, that you're not being made to feel special enough by getting them directly from the publisher and getting put on the list or whatever, that's not a good look. Because in a lot of cases, the hard truth is most booktubers don't have big enough followings for publishers to want to deal with us. You have to have a pretty considerable following before they even bother. And honestly, if publishers aren't going to be constantly tossing out arcs that won't be read, I'm not mad. Because that's just not good from a consumerism, materialism standpoint. Don't just be tossing out arcs to people just to help other people feel special. Get savvy with it. Make sure that people from the demographic your book is about get to put out reviews about it beforehand. That's just good practice. But in general, if you want arcs of books, it's easier to get than one might think. You just gotta be humble about it. This next entry is one I could do an entire rant video about on its own. And if you're interested in that, let me know in the comments. But this next thing that reviewers do online is one of my all-time biggest pet peeves. And that is when they wholeheartedly refuse to review self-published books on the basis of quality. The concept that self-published books are guaranteed to be worse than trad books is everywhere in modern bookternet groups. And it is constant, and I don't think most people realize just how elitist of a take that is, especially among reviewers online. Because here's the thing, unless you are attached to a major company, a major publication, and that publication is printing or running your reviews, you are indie. You are self-published. If you're running your own booktube channel, you're the one editing and uploading your videos, you are indie. If you're running your own blog, you're the one editing and posting your blog entries, you are indie. So any argument against quality that could be made for indie books could be made for your content. Now imagine someone making those arguments against your content. And this is where we're at. It's been a big pet peeve of mine because I keep seeing so many people on the bookternet that are trying to demand all of this validation from trad publishing when we know trad publishing has so many issues, has had so many issues with the racism and horrific business practices. No, they'll still seek validation from them, but ignore the indie authors who, in theory, we should be one community. It should not feel like two separate communities so much between BookTube and the indie author sphere, but it really does feel like that. I've had so many indie authors tell me that I was the only booktuber they could get to take any kind of review request. This is not okay. And again, I could do an entire rant video if you want to let me know. But for right now, we gotta move on. Next up is when a reviewer makes a baseless assumption about the book or misinterprets the book's marketing, but still gives the book a low rating because of it. And if we're talking about this, we gotta talk about Ace of Spades. So, a while back on book Twitter, the discourse popped up around this 1-star review of Frida Abika Imire's Ace of Spades, a YA thriller in the vein of your, Pretty Little Liars, mysterious person texting and revealing all the secrets and cool fun stuff. But this reviewer had decided that since the word ace was in the title, it must be referring to asexuals. And yes, the word ace does refer to asexuals in some context. The word ace also has like 20 other definitions, and Ace of Spades already kind of gives you the context of that. And in the book, there is a mysterious antagonist that goes by the name Aces. And so the reviewer decided that this book was ace-phobic because it had the word ace in the title and was not about asexuals, and also the antagonist was named Aces. Here's the thing. There were other queer characters in the book. There were other aspects of the community in the book, and a lot of the discourse was focused on the fact that very notable that it was an author of color that got such a bad faith review, and it was paragraphs long. I did skim through it. I think it has been taken down last I checked, but there's no point to this. Don't get me wrong, I have screwed up and misread marketing before. I have been told something or for some reason got something in my head that I only found out later was not the truth of the book, or that I had somehow screwed up. That happens when you're going through a ton of book marketing, or you see a synopsis that seems familiar but you didn't pay attention to the nuance. You might screw it up and misunderstand. But if you do, you as the reviewer have to take ownership of that. You cannot give a heinously low score and imply that the author is in any way phobic of X identity just because you misunderstood. What? Now, these last two are notable because this is where you can really see some of those unexamined prejudices pop up in a reviewer's work. It is fully possible for a reviewer to give a lower score to an author of color than they would a white author without even realizing it. That's why you constantly got to be examining why you're reviewing the way you are. But this next one is a base level of disrespect that is almost exclusively reserved for authors of color, and that is when a reviewer just refuses to pronounce the author's name on their videos because, well, I'll just butcher it. This is incredibly disrespectful. Now, do I believe that the reviewer will totally say the name correctly? Probably not. The American school system has failed millions when it comes to language learning, but the thing is, you owe that author your good faith effort to try and pronounce it correctly. I'll even give you a little bit of a tip for it. If you're reviewing a trad author, simply Google their name and interview. Majority of interviews will begin with an introduction that says their name aloud. Listen to that 10 or 20 times, however long it takes you, until you've gotten a decent grasp. You might still screw it up, but at least you gave it your best faith effort. Now, if you're dealing with an indie author that has not given many vocal reviews, simply message the indie author. At that point, they're probably still open to hearing about it. And not only will they not be mad, in most cases, I've actually gotten review books from that, where I had read the author's other work, wanted to talk about it on my BookTube channel, but I wasn't quite sure how to pronounce their last name, so I said, hey, quick thing, could I get a phonetic pronunciation of your last name for my BookTube channel? And they were so excited to find out that a booktuber was talking about them that I got put on the review list. It's happened. Or I get thanked because it's so common for people not to put in the base effort to pronounce someone's name correctly, or to even try and pronounce their name at all. So if you are a white reviewer specifically, you are not showing any kindness to that author of color by refusing to pronounce their name just so you won't butcher it. Listen to the reviews or interviews you can find online, ask them directly, and practice until you get it. Did I probably screw up Frida Abika Imire's name? Maybe, but I listened to that interview like 10 times, so I might have to listen to it 10 times more. But authors in general deserve to have their name attached to their work. They wouldn't be publishing it if they didn't want their work out there, and they deserve the recognition for it. So learn how to do it and say their names. All right, I saved the worst for last, and this is specifically when reviewers, or really anyone on the general bookternet that is talking about and recommending books, specifically white people, say that they don't want to read specific diverse books from any level of marginalization, from your queer books, your disabled authors, your neurodivergent characters, what have you, but mostly, it seems to be mostly people of color, when they just say they can't get into those books because they're just not relatable. That is a bullshit reasoning, and I am so flabbergasted that people honestly say that as if everyone's not going to know it's bullshit reasoning, when the number one most beloved genre on the bookternet as a whole is fantasy. Are you an elf, my guy? Do you understand what it is to have fairy wings or magic? Since when do we care about whether or not the books are relatable? I've never looked at a book and been like, well, this isn't exactly my experience, so clearly I don't want it. The diverse books are some of the most fun ones. They can actually open up your worldview and like teach you things, or sometimes they can just open up your worldview and you have fun. This idea of things needing to be relatable, and specifically, it is specifically white reviewers and white bookternet people saying this kind of stuff, because most people of color are forced to intake media that is centered on whiteness, because that's just the way media has been for so long. Generally speaking, there's no reason for this. If you can't find something relatable in this character needs to defeat the big bad or solve the thing, or they're in danger, they would like to not be in danger now, please, then that's something in your brain. If you look at a book with a specific demographic of person and you're like, well, I just can't relate to that demographic, so I don't want to read about them, you probably have something in your head unexamined that is against that demographic, and you should really look into that more. Now, in this instance, I'm not saying that you should suddenly begin reviewing books if you have this kind of thought process in your head, because the likelihood of artificially lower star ratings is very high. But, you know, maybe start reading them quietly and getting out there and learning that it's not all about you, and that in some cases, yeah, those books from the Black authors, the Indigenous authors, the authors of various neurodivergencies or disabilities or what have you, could be a lot of fun and be really good books, and you are only depriving yourself by not reading them. But in general, just be honest. We all know what you're saying when you say you can't read books unless they're relatable. You're saying you don't want any book that doesn't center you. And that is it. That is the list of the worst thing reviewers do online. Have I missed some? Have you come across some? Please let me know down in the comments below. Most of my videos aren't necessarily this negative. However, if you do want that rant review, I have had a lot of thoughts about that for a really long time. So let me know. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.